Well, I don't know exactly the order. You just mentioned about where to start, and I think the place to start is probably just go ahead and start with that Paddleford information that I just sent to you. And what most people assume is that they somehow created the U.S. when they did not. They don't have anything to do with it. It's not about them. And that's the reason we're going to start with the Paddleford case. You know, this is what I heard back in 1999 from Albert when he said the Constitution wasn't written for you, you're not signatory to it, and you're not of the posterity. Now, I already knew that because in language procedure I knew the P was capitalized in the preamble. There was a language procedure that was known to the founders back then called a capital. When you capitalize the first letter of a word, you change its meaning, which is why they capitalized the word people of the United States, and it's exactly why they capitalized the word posterity. And when you look at the preamble and you understand contract language, the entity they formed was the people of the United States, which established the Constitution for the United States of America. It was one group establishing something for another group. Now, if one group is establishing for another group, that means they are in the superior position. So those that were the people of the United States were establishing a constitution for the United States of America. They weren't doing it because they were nice. These were the commandments of how they were going to run the charters and the government. We'll get into that about how they were going to manage the bankruptcy and pay back the 18 million that were borrowed from France by the United States of America, and what provisions had to be put in place to guarantee to the international community that that debt was going to be paid. Now, people arrogantly assume that they're smarter today than they were 200 years ago or 250 years ago. That in itself is a break in the thinking, since they will say that the public school system dumbs everyone down. Well, if it dumbs everyone down, then obviously we were included in the everyone. Correct? Anyway, Paddleford case was specifically about a taxation case in 1854. The mayor and city alderman of Savannah, Georgia, was imposing inspection taxes and fees on Paddleford that they protested. Paddleford made an issue out of it, took it into the Supreme Court of Georgia, and this is part of the decision. The decision itself is probably 80 pages. The meat of the decision was all I really cared about. Supposing this not to be taxed for inspection purposes, has Congress consented to it being laid? It is certain that Congress has not expressly consented, but is express consent necessary? There is nothing in the Constitution which says so. There is nothing in the practice of men, or in the municipal law of men, or in the practice of nations, or in the law of nations that says so. Silence gives consent is the rule of business life. A tender of bills is as good as one coin unless the bills are objected to. To stand by in silence and see another sell your property binds you to the contract. These are the mere instances of the use of this maxim in the municipal law. In the law of nations, it's equally potent. Silent acquiescence in the breach of a treaty binds an entire nation. The breach of a treaty can be done by the head, or it can be done by someone underneath the head, but it only has to be done by one. I'm on page 35 at the top. The center of that paragraph, we're talking about how the law of nations, the municipal law, apply when it comes to silent acquiescence, because the ancient maxim of law is silence gives rise to fraud, or it gives rise to total agreement. Now, just because somebody's silent to you, you may not have standing to worry about whether or not they're silent to you. This stuff works real well in corporate dealings and contract dealings here in the U.S. among people and among corporations. It doesn't work well against the government because people are not sovereign above the government. The government is sovereign above them as United States citizens, and as state citizens, and as nationals, and as aliens, and as residents. And if you don't have political power, you have civil rights, and we'll show that in a minute about it, how civil rights are granted and how they can be taken away. Now, the principle at the bottom of these propositions is this: the states have no power. See, here we're going to go into state sovereignty, which there's this illusion that people have that being a state citizen makes them sovereign, when the word citizen itself means subject. In addition to that, they were not signatory to any of the compacts that created those states, and they're not the posterity of any of the parties that created those states. And the states themselves are not sovereign. Now, the principle at the bottom of these propositions is the states have no power, by the exercise of which they can defeat all ends of government, the general government or any of those ends. But the state, by the exercise of the taxing power, can take from their inhabitants every cent the inhabitants can spare, and the state can live. See, that tells you about state subjects right there, or state citizens. The state can take everything they got. And they've confirmed this in court decisions, even up in 1995 with the Emsminger case, where they said that the United States of America surrendered all right, title, and interest to the United States. That means all these people running around claiming themselves to be Americans have no right, no title, and no interest. Well, if you have no right, no title, no interest, then you have no standing to state a claim for which relief can be granted, ever. Does that make sense to you, Ray? Right, and the people that think they have some kind of say-so and that have no say-so, the system's going to do what it's doing because it's doing it for the posterity of those who created that system. Okay? According to the principle of this decision, therefore, the states have no power to lay any tax on their inhabitants, and if they have the power to tax, it follows that they have no power to enable them to keep up their state governments, and without state governments, they have no power to keep themselves alive as states. The principle comes to this, that the states, in making the Constitution, intended to give up the power of self-preservation, which we would also call self-determination. Alright, I'm going to switch over to the next page. At least I think I am. Yeah, page 36. This was in a different page on this decision with Paddleford, but it gets into some things like we talked about earlier. The people of the states who made the Constitution considered themselves as the sovereign and the government as the subject. They were the principal, their agent. That this is true, none will dispute. And this is the commentary from this book where it says, we all know that it was not us people who made the Constitution, but the select few as stated by the court at page 520, wherein they said, but indeed no private person has a right to complain by suit in court on the grounds of a breach of the Constitution. The Constitution, it is true, is a compact, but he is not a party to it. Okay? The states are parties to it, and they can complain. If they want to complain on your behalf, then they're entitled to a redress. Or they can choose to waive their right to complain on your behalf. And the reason I say your behalf is because Schultz and we the people keep going to the Supreme Court, and they keep telling them, hey, we don't have to listen to anything you got to say. Well, right here it is. You don't have a right to redress. Because why? You should have gone to the state first, and then they chose to take up your cause. Then they can bring it to us, the federal government. Or they can waive their right to take up your cause. Well, their cause is whatever they think about the taxation with the IRS and Title 26 and 16th Amendment. And people say, well, the 16th Amendment was never ratified. Ray, let's just go back to silent acquiescence. Do you think the states have already agreed to the 16th Amendment according to the doctrine of silent acquiescence? Yes. There's nothing to ratify. Now, in addition to that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of these 2 pages here. Yeah, Paddleford's, those 2 things are self-explanatory. There's not even a need to spend a lot of time on it. People don't have a right to redress. The states have a right to redress, so you have to go to the state to complain. Then they get to choose whether or not they want to take your complaint to the federal. That's procedure. That's the protocol. And over again, Schultz and we the people get told that they keep violating protocol, and they won't listen.